Hello everyone and welcome to the 5th SSP webinar of 2019. You are joining us for a discussion titled, Are There Finally Real Use Cases for AI? I'm Jeff Lang with the American Chemical Society, the chair of the SSP Webinars Working Group, and we're all pleased that you could join us today. In a moment, we'll get started and hear from our moderator and panelists. You'll be seeing the SSP Start screen as we start this session. Your phone will be muted automatically in consideration of our presenters and your fellow webinar participants. Please use the questions feature on the side of your screen to send your questions, or if you need to let us know that you're having technical difficulties. The moderator will review your questions and present them to the panelists. To help him, please specify to which presenter you'd like your question directed. And also please send your questions as we go. They'll be addressed after the initial discussions. At the conclusion of today's session, you'll receive a webinar evaluation via email. We encourage you to provide feedback so we can continually improve the SSP webinar program. You will also receive a link via email to the recorded broadcast of this webinar and to the slides. Our moderator today is Tom Beyer, who is the Director of Platform Services at Sheridan Pub Factory. Tom is responsible for charting the direction of the Pub Factory platform and working with clients and prospects on how best to make use of the platform's features. Tom has been involved in building online solutions for publishers for over 20 years. Now I'll turn the webinar over to Tom so that he can introduce the panel and get us started.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this SSP webinar. Are there finally real cases for AI? In putting the webinar together, I was interested in trying to cut past some of the hype that surrounds AI. I really wanted to spend less time on the technology itself and instead try to focus on real-world use cases and experience of using AI in publishers' workflows today. I'm really excited by the program we've put together. We're lucky enough to have a varied and diverse set of speakers who've been using different technologies to solve different kinds of problems within their organizations. Each speaker will briefly introduce the problem they were trying to solve and their experience with the attempted solutions, and we'll leave ample time afterwards for discussion. So please compile and ask lots of questions. I think we'll get a lot out of the sort of interactions between the experiences, and hopefully, you'll get a lot from what these folks have to offer. So first, we're going to start with Laura Kedwell and Tommaso Olivero from B&J, followed by Scott Deneen from the Optical Society, and then we'll finish with Laura Mara from Cambridge University Press. And so why don't we get started with Laura and Tommaso.
Cool. So just sharing my screen, 1 second. Great. Okay. Hi there, everyone. So the problem that we're trying to fix, we found at BMJ that our journal content over the years has been tagged by a very organically grown list of categories. And I guess as time has gone by, maybe we found out that tagging had dropped off in one area briefly, or perhaps there wasn't the ability to maintain and extract the relevant content always. So what we decided we needed was a fresh solution. We wanted to standardize how we classified, created collections, and curated our corpus, and also hopefully along the way identify new ways of surfacing content. And there was, we had one situation where there was a journal that didn't actually have any particular collections in place. So we decided that was going to be a perfect area to start from scratch. And we also had more of an obvious driver in that advertisers who want to target on specialty, and they always feel that topic pages are a great way to reach clinicians who work in particular areas. So that was what we were trying to do. And so what we went for was Unsilo Classify. And so what that is it extracts the most important semantic concepts from a document, and using machine learning technologies and natural language processing, it understands the precise meaning of phrases within a document, and it captures all those, the semantic and syntactic variations. One thing that was great, it didn't require metadata, so it didn't have to sit, within anything. It was like sitting above. And obviously it would go through, read all the text and comprehend, all the articles in our corpus. So we tried it out. We really liked what it was doing. We were able to select a taxonomy that worked for us. So we got them to load in mesh. So therefore, all of our corpus was processed. It would extract any papers that had relevant concepts. And then as more and more content was ingested, it would then identify those concepts themselves. Just, if it appeared a certain amount of times in articles, they would be like, hey, this is a concept you want to, you might want to surface. And basically how it works is, we want to set up a collection, for example, we'll select a bunch of concepts from a drop-down list. If they're in a paper, then that paper will get pulled into a collection. And it's really layperson friendly, so we can set up classes really quickly based on concepts we've decided are appropriate for a class. You can take shortcuts by putting in gold documents if you want, which is kind of like, the gold standard of the kind of document you want it to output. And we found it's worked really well. So that's what we're doing in a nutshell with AI.
Great, thanks so much. And I'll pass it on to Scott Deneen.
Good morning, everyone. Just doing the share the screen operation here. Okay, hopefully you can all see my screen now. My talk is really about trying to find an AI approach, also for classifying content. It gels well with an organizational culture. I think as we look at AI solutions, we really need to resist the temptation to try to impose ideas that people should adopt if they know what's good for them, because they're so clever. And imposing on a culture like a scholarly society can be really problematic. This is also, I suppose, a story about how some of our assumptions were misaligned, both technical assumptions and culture ones, but also how we address them. I think we're positioned to be successful ultimately. If you haven't heard of the Optical Society, optics and photonics is very multidisciplinary. It covers everything from medical imaging to holography, quantum information, optical communications, astronomy, vision. So it's a huge range of topics, and understanding what the topical coverage is, both at the high conceptual level and at the detailed level, is hugely important for balancing out the different scopes of our journals, for marketing to the right people, on and on. So I'll talk about how we approached building a taxonomy and using that effectively for some different use cases. Just a very quick word about our thesaurus that you see on the screen here. Because optics and photonics is kind of a niche area, there was no existing thesaurus that we could use at the time we built ours. Now the APS has something called FISH that's based on the mesh categories that we're starting to use. But we did develop our own thesaurus, and I'm going to talk about the use cases that worked and didn't work with this thesaurus. A few words about the structure. It has a pretty deep hierarchy. If you look at the blue dots where it goes from materials to optical materials, nonlinear optical materials, etc., it's organized in a very logical way that made sense to some people and not to others, depending on what field they're working in. These are the use cases I'm going to talk about quickly in this presentation. Before I go through them, and it will be pretty quick, why don't you think about how successful we might have been with replacing our indexing codes, improving our search and browse, article similarity, and the other topics. I'm gonna use some icons to tell you how well we thought we did. Indexing codes. This is kind of a lateral move. We had manual indexing codes for years. Our thesaurus was just a marginal improvement to that. Search and browse brought a number of surprises. I'm going to illustrate that. But it was with article similarity that we were really happy. OSA had done article similarity for years, and people always criticized it at governance meetings or other areas. So we were able to leverage our article similarity to create a reviewer finder tool that really hit a sweet spot, and we love that solution. The trend analysis that we were really hoping to do to understand better the way our journals were positioned among one another and in the marketplace, we were really disappointed with that. And also related, the targeted marketing based on trend analysis was really frustrating. So let me illustrate a few concepts that we used with our thesaurus. The search engine, having a thesaurus is really great in a search engine, especially if there are synonyms. Somebody can search on a concept like gold that previously would just be a string match, but now because of the intelligence behind the term, if the title of the paper contains the concept, but not the term, like here we have AU, certainly we're happy about that. With more nuanced search, I think the results, that's where they became surprising. And we were maybe pushing our good ideas on the end users and not really successfully. So in advanced search, we allowed the users to search on or browse these new thesaurus terms that were indexed to the articles. And it wasn't really a strong program, in part because users really couldn't understand how the terms were organized. They were too granular, maybe too deeply organized. Likewise, when we surfaced these indexing terms on the abstract pages, which is the entry point for most of our users into our platform, there was some marginal benefit in seeing what the topics were. But the thing people really liked that we were able to do in a new way, powerful way, was to recommend articles that were relevant. Just very strong feedback over a long period of time that we did well with that. So we wanted to build on that concept of article similarity to solve a problem of being able to find reviewers more effectively. And so let me explain what we did. OSA has a big back file going back to 1917, and we have 18 journals on our platform and a number of conference papers. We have our own internal systems, so it seemed to be that the universe of our back file and our internal systems were really a good place for us to build a reviewer finder tool. The way it worked is that a submitted manuscript would be profiled against our thesaurus, and the published papers were also profiled. So we'd create similarity, the submitted manuscript to the published papers. And for recent papers, we know who all the authors are. So we can reveal, these are all the authors in our published papers database that are probably worth considering as reviewers for the submitted manuscript. Because we have the reviewer history database as well, we can narrow that field down. Some of the authors weren't responsive. Some of the authors may be authors of the submitted manuscript. And ultimately, there's a short list of suggestions that has been very effective with our editors who are looking for reviewers. Like all societies and all businesses really now, but not only in the US, but throughout the world, we're really trying to be more diverse. And being able to reveal people who might be good candidates that couldn't be found through personal networks has been really valuable. So that was a success. And the successes that I'm talking about had one thing in common. They were all under the hood profiling that didn't require somebody to make a decision about concepts that we were imposing based on the thesaurus terms. But we still had a big problem. You can see the surprised and frowny and frustrated faces on the screen. We had some really big challenges with creating high-level classification. That is, being able to know that an article was a quantum information paper or a biomedical optics paper across all of our content. It's really important we were able to do that well. The challenges were really around the organization's ability to agree on what the concepts were in the first place. That's exacerbated by this multidisciplinary nature of optics and photonics. And we knew that the resources to not only establish the high-level classification concepts, but to train them or teach them in one way or another to be intelligent, to use artificial intelligence, was going to be a really tough putt. We did come up with a solution that I would like to share, and I think it illustrates that once we started working more naturally with the internal culture of the organization, that's where we found traction and where I think we will be successful. All of our journals have tables of contents categories, and they're pretty detailed. They're subject related. They were incredibly messy though. There's no way we could have used them to profile content in any consistent way. So although it took some patience and discipline, we worked with our journal editors in chief and had them normalize, standardize, shrink their table of contents categories. And this took more than 2 years and a lot of staff work to do that. But we were successful, and we suspected and were right that we'd have organizational buy-in for using the TOC categories that represent the scopes of our journals as our concepts for artificial intelligence tasks. Fortunately, because these are table of contents categories, we have thousands of articles that are already assigned manually to the TOC categories. So we had training sets, we had training documents, and we're in the process now of finishing the machine learning operation to make the concepts really work for us. We can throw new articles, and the articles will get assigned several concepts with different confidence scores. Seems to be exactly what we need to meet the use cases where we were falling short earlier. And this last slide just gives you an idea of the level of concept that we're aiming for with this conceptual classification. We're sure that there will be some surprises and frustrations, but ultimately we think we're on the right track, and I wanted to share this story with you. So I think we may be turning it back to Tommaso next. I may have interrupted the previous presentation, so I'll turn it back to Tom to take over as moderator.
Totally my fault. Sorry. Yes, we're gonna circle back, and Tommaso's just going to follow up on Laura's talk, just to talk a little bit about some of the challenges they faced in implementing their work. So go ahead, Tommaso.
Thank you. Yes, I hope you can hear me and you can see my screen at the moment. So yeah, we talking about like what's gone well and what hasn't gone on well. Let me just present it here. There we go. So what's gone well with this project is that it really is helping us keeping on top and making sense of our own content. You know, it's like what we publish. BMJ is not a massive big publishers. We expect, for instance, 2019 to have about like 30,000 articles to be published, which seems a big number, but it's not yet. It is still a lot, you know, if you want to keep on top about like all the topics, all the things that we publish, without having to, you know, have people that actually do that, and update collections, update lists, update things, you know, like because this is what we use it for. This is what we used AI for, mainly to build like a subject, to collect, to make sense of what we were publishing, which could lead to new business opportunities as well, which Lara mentioned before. It can also improve customer experiences because you can, by grouping content, by creating collection, we can offer a better service to the users, to specialists to look at our content. As I said, automatize manual tasks, updating collections. We can create new topic areas, identifying gaps in our content, and in general explore. We are really looking at finding questions and answers about new uses and concepts and topics that we have identified using the system. Also, the fact that there is a part of a manual control, human control in the platform, which basically allows for humans to check for the output and confirm or approve that effectively, for instance, an article belongs to a class. So an article fits well into a topic, belongs to this topic, is about this topic, allows for a sense of control, and this is also very interesting because it's part of then practices that are evolving in the way that we use the tool and the way we understand to use the tool. For instance, a class that is about a topic that is well set up, that is able to find the document and the content that we're looking for, and is able to filter all the new output and put the new output that belongs to the class into the class, then we'll need less and less manual control to a point where it can be fully automatic, but it's good that we can test and play and refine, and that with a higher human intervention at the beginning, proceeding to a more total automation. Similarly, what hasn't gone so well so far, from what we've found, is that of course there is still a bit of uncertainty and misconception about machine learning, about AI in general. So of course we know that the statement, AI is good as much as the data that we put in is good, so that's fine, and that's a very, very good lesson also in terms of how we structure the content that we feed the system with, but also that there is a bit of uncertainty, misconception about the fact that this will be some sort of magic black box that will solve all problems. We just need to feed them the content and it will come up with solutions and things. It's not as simple, Shortly, I mentioned it before, class is only as good as the designer. So of course we need to tell the machine and the systems what we're looking for. We need to getting from mesh, starting from mesh, which is huge. We need to identify the concepts that are about the topic that we want to find content with, that we want to investigate. And so it's also important to have it, to decide, from an editorial point of view, what is the focus of this class? What is the focus of the investigation? What are we trying to do here? Because some classes, some experiments could be more broad, more generic, others can be quite specific. So for instance, for our in practice veterinary journal, the system is not able to distinguish the various species of the animals. So that's a case where we would like to retain a much larger human intervention, if I could say so, because the system is not able to distinguish this. Also, another thing that we'll put it in the not so well part, but it's actually something that we keep learning. These are all lessons. So how to use specialist input. We found that we can really benefit from the input of subject matter experts in terms of like defining the concept of the research, and it's usually also people that could have a good understanding on what the content already is, you know, if that makes sense, and so can identify areas of investigation. However, they need to have experience or get more experience in how the system works, because otherwise it's very abstract, you know, like the way that it could be approached, you know, it could be approached with a simple list of keywords, what can be thought as keywords, but that is not the best way to take the most out of the system. And just to conclude, I'm going to share, if you don't mind, well, the front end of what is currently being powered by Unsilo. So we've got our oncology website. I hope you can see it. And this widget here pulls out the recent oncology articles from all our BMJ journals. So the idea is that, of course, if there is a new article that is published in one of our 70 journals that fits into this topic, it will then display here as in a form of a link to the paper. We did the same for cardiology, and in a similar way, this is our veterinary in practice journal collections. So these are all classes set up in the system. The front end is a prototype, as you can see. We're still looking at, you know, what's the best way to display these collections, and then within each of these links there is a series of a list of content of articles that belong to that class. And I think that's it, Tom, for me.
Great. Thank you so much, Tommaso. And now we'll move on to Lauren Mara from Cambridge University Press. So.
Hi, everyone. As Tom noted, my name is Lauren Mara. I work for Cambridge University Press, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're utilizing new methods of AI to provide a quicker, more better service for our authors. So one of the big things that's facing publishers right now is speed to publication. And while there are many major publishers that are able to offer turnarounds as fast as 48 to 72 hours, most of the time this sacrifices a certain level of quality as well as author engagement that at Cambridge we're looking to preserve. So one of the ways that we've been looking to do this is updating and incorporating new technologies into existing relationships with our vendors. One of those is contextual copy editing, which is a system that uses an AI algorithm based on parameters that we customize and evaluates the language quality of a manuscript while also determining what level of editing it would require. So it's looking for a lot of different basic grammatical and stylistic elements that can be customized based on the journal, based on the publisher expectations. And what this does is essentially spits out a report to us that lets us know what this article requires. The great thing about contextual copy editing is the machine learning behind it allows it to continue to evolve and improve based on the amount of content that we're putting into it. So as time goes on, it's getting better and better. At this point, the pilot program that we've been using has probably processed about 10,000 to 20,000 manuscripts. So already we're seeing a big improvement from even the beginning to what we're seeing now. The second way that we're kind of utilizing AI is through a program called Casper, which is provided by one of our typesetting vendors, NovaTextSet. So Casper incorporates contextual copy editing, letting us know what the value, what the language quality of the manuscript requires, and then starts to do a process that allows the application of style elements, basic grammatical elements, formatting, and provides all of this in an automated way for the operators to then work on the grammatical and stylistic elements in the foreground. So Casper is really unique in that it's compiling everything in the background with a continuous reflow of XML, or extensible markup language, which essentially is a way that is encoding text for both humans and machines to read. So while usually that is something that requires human intervention, Casper allows for this to be happening in the background of it, while providing an interface for a human, a copy editor, to directly edit the content and allow that to reflow in the background. What this does is bypass a lot of traditional elements of typesetting, which have a lot to do with page layout, formatting requirements, and more consistently applies the style requirements for the operator. And my next slide here, sorry, is just as a quick snapshot of what Casper actually looks like to an author. That has all of the main elements organized in an HTML platform for an author to interface with, but still has that XML reflow in the background for them to look at. So the results of what we've been doing have been really promising, actually. We've been using Casper for about 5 months now, across 5 different scientific, technical, and medical, or STM journals, including actually 2 key society titles, which was a bit of a risk for us, just to maintain the relationships that we had. But they were looking for a very rapid turnaround time to publication that we weren't able to offer at that time. So currently within these 5 journals, we've seen publication time decrease by an average of 25 to 45%, which can be huge, anywhere from 10 to 15 days, depending on the journal. We've also seen general reductions of anywhere from 33 to 50% in turnaround times for spent copy editing, typesetting, and the correction processing. The majority of the reason we're seeing such a reduction is, like I said, we're bypassing that general element of typesetting. You're not getting a PDF to mark up to then send back to a human operator that's having to make those changes in the XML for you. You're actually getting to interact with the XML on your own. And finally, we've had a really improved author experience with this. One of the main author complaints we tend to get is by marking up a PDF, you're not actually getting to see the results of the changes that you're making. So within Casper, you're able to see in real time what changes that you're making, and provide yourself with an updated version of what your article will look like to ensure that your corrections are processed properly. And there's been a couple of challenges, obviously, within this new technology, as there always are. AI in general and machine learning, it only improves as you use it. But unfortunately, there can still be times when it's a little more rudimentary than what you're looking for. It's interesting to see something like this coming into use, though, considering that spell check, something so basic, was invented in the 70s, and yet it's still taking till now until we're able to really sort of capitalize on that and see new ways to work. But by streamlining these processes of formatting and reference styling that don't require a human necessarily, we're really seeing big gains in using Casper for that. One of the challenges for me, though, as a production manager, is making sure that we're able to roll this out not just across STM journals, but also into other disciplines. Humanities titles tend to be much more focused on layout design and format, which can be a little difficult to offer in an HTML-based platform for authors to understand. As well, for anything that's in the heavy maths or sciences that are using LaTeX, another document preparation system that requires markup tagging. Currently, XML and LaTeX are a little bit at odds in terms of presentation elements. So we're looking at new ways to advance Casper and other programs like Casper to allow for those kinds of documentation. But overall, I think what we're seeing with these new programs in AI is ways not to replace human intervention, but to assist it. And especially in the copy editing realm, which is a very subjective realm of what good copy editing is, it's hard to see human intervention ever truly go to the wayside. But being able to do basic elements of formatting and rule setting on their behalf aids them and gives them the opportunity to spend their time on more important elements of copy editing, like style and grammar. So I'm really interested to see how we can continue to use Casper and other programs like it to improve that experience, both for the operators themselves and for the authors, to make sure that they're still getting that level of quality that they're looking for.
Excellent. Thanks so much for sharing that. In terms of one of the things I was interested in sort of poking at a little across all of your experiences was whether or not there's anything that's sort of inherent in the AI quality of the technology that's different from instituting, any new sort of piece of technology. Does this feel, quantitatively different? Did the organization have to sort of manage this project differently, or did it have a different sort of, way of impacting the organization that is sort of feels sort of inherent to the AI aspect of the technology?
This is Scott. I think one simple observation is that a lot of the human manual tasks for putting labels on content or indicating what they're about are inherently inconsistent. And one thing that AI does is allow for, if it's done right, great deal of consistency across, could be large amounts of content when we're trying to see what is the content about at a high level or a detailed level. That really can only happen with the machine process and with AI.
This is Lauren. I agree with Scott there. The level of consistency that you're able to see when using a machine, it's really unparalleled. And a lot of that is AI is set up with levels of rules ahead of time that a human just can't possibly be able to match on the level of consistency that machines do.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, the other thing I wanted to ask Lauren was whether or not, given that, as you mentioned, it wasn't as good at first, was there sort of faith in the organization to sort of keep with it as it got better, or was that something that, you sort of had to, were you expecting that?
Yes, I was. I had talked at length with the engineers behind this program about what it would take and what kind of waiting period there would have to be, an evaluation period there would have to be able to see that improvement. We had been doing a lot of testing before moving it into live work, so been putting thousands of manuscripts, both from ourselves and from other publishers, into the system to be able to start getting it to learn. Unfortunately, any kind of machine learning, it's right there in the name, learning. It's going to continue to get better as it grows, but you do have to have a level of faith that you're going to see those changes. And once we got to a point where we really felt that the improvement had been seen, we started putting live work into that.
Right. And how about Tommaso and Laura? How about with your team? Was there anything sort of different about this technology from other technology projects you've done in the past?
I think one thing we did find very interesting that Tommaso alluded to earlier was, the magic black box. And I think there was that uncertainty of some users, particularly in the early days, about what they were doing and how much that was actually training the system. So I think there's also there is a misconception sometimes, how clever something is being. And I think we had this thing, obviously, where there was a lot of manual intervention to sort of fine tune classes. And while that was more something that was just for the user to sort the integrity of the results, I think there was this conception that obviously every single thing they did with Unsilo Classify would be, getting logged and improving the system somewhere. And that was one thing that was actually a challenge to break down. But otherwise, I think it's felt fairly similar to other projects that we've put in place. It's great though, because it just seems to really have enthused so many different areas of the business. Everyone's really come together to get excited about that. And I guess that's also where, something like a new technology does seem a bit more exciting and a bit uniting in a variety of areas. I'm not sure if Tommaso has anything to add.
Yeah, no, you said it perfectly. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So a question from our audience. Google and Amazon both offer sort of general purpose machine learning AI tools. Did any of you all consider using those more general tools instead of very specific publisher-based AI tools?
Lara here. To be fair, we already obviously use things like chatbots in customer support. So, again, it was one of those stealth things that our Unsilo Classify project is the first that people have externally been recognizing as to do with machine learning or AI. But in fact, as a business, it's been going on a lot longer, I think, than everyone realized. So again, there was that perception, which is interesting.
And Tommaso here, in the specifics of Microsoft and Google API, I think that Unsilo conducted some tests, and the results seem to be more positive with that system rather than with Google and Microsoft that require also different infrastructure interventions as well.
I think the precursors to this level of AI have been in use in publishing for quite some time now. There's a lot of things that are automated. This is just about kind of pressing what that automation could be and how we could evolve that in a new method. I think especially journals publishing, working in so many different disciplines, especially in the science and mathematics disciplines, there's a level of requirement to sort of evolve as the research is evolving and be able to offer those kinds of platforms for people to get that research out as quickly as possible, but still maintaining a level of publication quality that one would expect rather than just posting it on a blog.
Yep. Okay, a question for you, Lauren. The contextual copy editing tool, is that also from Nova TechSet, or were you combining tools from different companies?
It is also from Nova TechSet, although most of the typesetting vendors that I work with currently have some form of contextualized copy editing. It's really something that a lot of typesetting vendors have been moving towards because it allows them to better source the kind of human operators that they need. So if they're able to determine what level of quality, what level of copy editing an article requires, they can send it to maybe an English-based copy editor, perhaps in the UK and the US, versus an Indian-based copy editor. So it's been utilized in a lot of different vendors lately. Although TechSet's the first one that I've seen incorporate that into another tool, into Casper, the way they have. But I'll be interested to see if that is a trend that continues.
Yeah, building on what Lauren just said, at the front end of the process, when papers are just being submitted, a lot of publishers, including OSA, try to determine the quality of English if it's an English journal. That's always been manual, but I think the AI tools are good enough that one consider that initial check, submission check, including quality of English, to be powered by AI.
Yeah, that seems like a great use case. And have you seen an improvement in the quality of the copy editing on the part of the vendor, Lauren? And are you providing feedback on that copy editing?
First, yes, I've definitely seen some improvements, and I think again a lot of that is it's getting to the right people now that it's run through these programs. And also, as I mentioned previously, the rule setting portion of this applies journal style so much more uniformly than any person ever really could. So in general, yes, I've seen an improvement for that. And I'm sorry, could you repeat the second part of the question?
Oh, how is that feedback getting?
Sure, of course. So we provide feedback at a granular level on a per article basis for 2 out of the 5 titles that are in it right now, due to the fact that they're fairly low volume. So we're able to actually do that on an article basis. For some of the larger titles that are in it, we're looking at it more holistically. We do have an author survey that's attached to Casper right now, basically asking them how they interacted with the system, what they thought of the quality of the content that they saw. What's really interesting is we're going to pilot a new journal in it next month that will provide sort of a report to the author with a marked up version of what was actually copy edited during the Casper program. So we will be able to get a lot more in-depth feedback for that particular test title to see where we're going. But in general, I feel pretty confident about it. And this is coming from someone who also freelance copy edits on my own time. I don't necessarily see that going extinct anytime soon.
Yeah. And a question for you, Scott. I was really fascinated that that one of the outcomes that you talked about was the fact that you had this super detailed granular taxonomy, and yet some of the issues you ran into were actually around the fact that you need a much sort of looser or more general classification scheme, and had to sort of that didn't sort of well up from the detailed classification scheme necessarily. Can you just talk about that a little? Was that something that seemed totally unexpected to me? But
it was unexpected to us. Our gap in thinking is that the thesaurus organization could help us track big trends, but the way that the thesaurus was organized, it was hyperlogical. It was something the computer could understand, but somebody in marketing or somebody looking at trends had no use for it. So we needed to separate out indexing, which worked very well with our thesaurus, from classification. So indexing would be sticking little sticky notes on each paper, whereas classification is putting each paper into a big bucket that we've established. And as I mentioned in my talk, once we figured that out, then our challenge was, well, how do we set up these big buckets in a way that everyone agrees? Once we did that, we were pretty agnostic about what machine learning tools would work. They didn't necessarily have to be publisher machine learning tools. We felt as long as we had good training sets, good topics, and good methodology, whether we just used Python, homegrown tools, or used a vendor tool. I'll mention the vendor because we like them very much. We're using Expert System for our machine learning and our thesaurus indexing, and we used Access Innovations to build our very successful thesaurus. Since others have mentioned vendors, I'd like to thank the vendors we're working with as well.
Thanks so much. Yeah. And another question from the audience. So the whole idea of sort of having to have faith from the organization that the tools are going to work. In the early days, was there, did you have to sort of fight back against the notion that the tools weren't working necessarily as well or as consistently as they would, and but eventually they were going to enhance the way humans work? Or additionally, sort of organizationally, were people worried about the degree to which these tools could push people out of their jobs? So any of issues like that you guys had to face?
In terms of showing a proof of concept to, in our case, a volunteer member organization, we certainly wanted to give a minimal viable proof of concept to get approval to move forward. But we found that our scientist members, if they saw something that was a proof of concept to show the mechanics, but that they didn't like the results, they weren't accurate enough, that they grew very skeptical. So we learned that our proof of concept had to also show results that would make sense, not just in terms of the mechanics, but that even if it was a small amount of data, that the data just tended to look right, look accurate, and not just look like a mock-up.
I think it's important to note that automation doesn't necessarily mean making someone obsolete. And even with powerful AI tools like this, there's always going to need to be a level of human intervention and human eyeballs on something, no matter how good the quality gets. I think in terms of the faith of an organization, what you do with that, it's really important to be able to pivot, especially in a big publishing organization, and not put all your eggs in one basket, in one vendor, in one tool. So having these sorts of small pilot programs is a really great way to be open to trying new sorts of AI and production tools, but also hedging your bets. And if something doesn't work the way that you thought it would, then pivot and go a different way and look into something new.
And so, Tommaso, was that?
Oh,
Did I hear you?
oh yeah, no, sure. Just from our end, I think that totally agree with what Lauren said about it doesn't mean necessarily that removing work from people, but it might be just recalibrating things and actually find new opportunities and new ways and new areas to focus on, getting rid of manual manual tasks that could be a problem also, especially if they're connected to something that needs to be updated constantly. And we see also that, as said before, categorizing content by humans and by the machine has certain different degrees of consistency. I think that from our end also there was a big focus on exploring, actually, and see what we can do in terms of trust. There, of course, as said, it needs to be pivoted, it needs to be logic, it needs to be meaningful, it needs to have a direction. We found it very useful to sit down together with the vendor and people from within the company and come up with ideas and come up with use cases that we can then further develop and establish measure of success that we can reach, milestones and a proper roadmap, and proceed on that sense, in order to establish if something can be actually done and it's done correctly, that will ultimately generate trust.
Yeah. And finally, in terms of future direction, do you see these programs, getting incorporated sort of organization wide? Are you pursuing ideas with the technology? How, sort of, are you sort of going deeper on what you're currently working on, or do you see just taking the technology and looking for new use cases for it?
This is Scott. I have a response to that. Organizations, societies, or commercial organizations are always going to want to be able to profile people better, much in the way we've talked about profiling scientific articles or other content. And so I think there is going to be a push, and there already is, for societies to do some of the things the big commercial players are doing to try to find out who are these people, how can I do something altruistic, like get them to serve on a panel or review a paper, but also, how can I send them more emails about topics I think they're interested in. So I think inevitably the AI push to profile people better, to engage with them in different ways in our business is going to get stronger and stronger, and that'll be, kind of a top-down pressure.
That's an interesting way to think about it, that, a lot of what we're talking about is around any content better, but there's sort of a similar need to understand people and be able to categorize them as well. That's interesting.
Right, and I think that's a little risky. We can make all kinds of assumptions that the author of the paper is an expert in this topic, which might not be true for any given paper. Authors' contributions to papers or attending a meeting or any one thing might be marginal if we just look at that one thing. So I think it will involve more complexity, using things like semantic triples to really understand the nature of the relationships that a person has with the different activity they have with a society or a publisher or another group.
Yeah. And one other thought I had was, there's been a certain amount of discussion in AI more broadly about sort of unintended bias that the systems can bring to bear on problems. And I just wondered if any of you had grappled with any of that. Is any of the ways that things are being categorized, potentially pushing certain kinds of papers, or doing categorization in a way that pushes certain things and not others, that was either unexpected or maybe puts a slant on things that is perhaps not, that needs to be considered.
I think it's really important to note that for the AI tools that I've been discussing, that this is all post-acceptance. We're not making any judgments about the veracity of the content, about how well written it is, or anything like that. This has already gone through peer review. This has already been accepted into a journal. So we're not really seeing that kind of bias in those senses. If anything, we're actually more open to allowing papers that might not be perfectly ready for publication to start going through the publication process, to help, especially with English as a second language for many Asian authors. So we've actually seen a fair amount of improvement, not only in the final delivered quality that we're getting of the publishing pieces, but also with the author response to that. We've had a lot of really positive author response thanking us for improving the quality and preparing their paper according to the journal style. So if anything, I've seen improvements.
With regard to bias, with my use case, creating topics, definitely there was perceived bias that applied and industry representation of the topics was not strong, and that there was a clash between the fundamental academic notion of the concepts and the applied research notion of the concepts.
Oh, fascinating. So you were privileging sort of an academic notion over a applied notion of the field.
That was one of the risks, and that had come up as a concern. That's right.
Yeah. Oh, fascinating. So, and how do you see things progressing in the future? With these projects.
Tommaso here, and
yeah.
So just also finishing also before, like we haven't perceived problems as a result of bias so far. We haven't got, despite the fact that we had many people, both internal and external, using the system to set up classes, we haven't received negative feedback in that sense. We received, of course, feedbacks about like how the system works, if it works fine or not. I made the example about the species before for animals and veterinary thing, but although like that is probably due to the fact that we're using mesh, which is not necessarily a taxonomy probably best suited for like veterinary content. Well, in terms of future, we received good feedback said from people that used it, also external people that found it useful and easy to use this sort of system to quickly find content. Again, probably depends on the use, what users are they for, what's the focus, what tools are already available, but there are lots of potentials. There is possibility to integrate the knowledge that come from the system with other sets of knowledge to generate more insights about content, about other things. So I think that like there are promising cases and ways ahead, I think. Yeah.
Great. And finally, for people who are considering jumping into these waters, do you have anything, sort of a important, thing to think about, or, just something to, sort of the first most important piece of advice for people who are thinking getting into this?
Scott here. I'll just reemphasize my point that the more you can work with existing culture and resist the temptation to try to impose a good idea, probably the more success you'll have, at least with the type of project that I was talking about.
Yep.
From my perspective, I think it's important to always be looking forward and adapting to a changing environment. There's a bit of of a temperature among a lot of academics that if things have worked the way they have for so long, why make a change? But that's a terrible way to sort of look at what machines can offer us and improve production processes and publication processes. We've seen with the advent of search engine optimization how much tagging content properly can result in a wider dissemination. So I think it's just about making sure that we're balancing what has been working and is currently acceptable while still looking for ways to evolve that in the future.
Well, and Lauren, I noted that you mentioned use of LaTeX in your workflow, which means that your workflow is respecting, what a legacy markup that the community values and wants to continue using. So that was encouraging to hear.
Yeah, there's a lot of power in LaTeX and a lot of what LaTeX can do, nothing else can match at the moment. So it's a way about finding technologies that lend themselves to all different ways of writing, especially for people that are very wedded to LaTeX in the science communities. That's not a community that's going to go away quietly.
Agreed.
Yeah. So unfortunately, we've hit our 12 o'clock hour. So I've got to hand it over to Jeff. But thanks to our speakers for such a really interesting presentations and discussion.
Absolutely. What a fantastic discussion here. Thank you to Tom and Laura, Tommaso, Scott, and Lauren for engaging in an excellent discussion today. Thanks to our sponsors, TrendMD, and thank you for attending the webinar. Once again, please do take time to respond to the webinar evaluation that you'll receive in your email. Your feedback helps us to continually improve this webinar program. Up next, please also join us for the last SSP webinar of the year, a scholarly kitchen webinar entitled The Future of Content Distribution, Licensing or Leakage on Tuesday, November 19th. And with that, we are concluded. Enjoy the rest of your day.